Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the ZMF Bokeh Closed. So in my last review, I took a look at ZMF's Caldera Closed, which is their premium flagship closed back headphone. And this here with the Bokeh is kind of like their entry-level closed back headphone. Whereas the Caldera is $3,500, this one is just $1,100. And I know that is not cheap, but compared to $3,500, that is quite a bit cheaper. Now, what I mentioned in that last review when I reviewed the Calderas, that was my first chance to really spend some time at home with ZMF headphones. And, you know, I've always been kind of interested in the product and the company because they do something kind of unique, right? Where they do these hand-built headphones made out of real wood. They all have kind of like their own unique characteristic to them. And there's kind of like a pride of ownership aspect of ZMF headphones that you frankly just don't get with your average run-of-the-mill monthly release chi-fi stuff, right? And I think that's pretty cool. And I was very curious to see, is the Bokeh Closed like a nice kind of entry level into that same pride of ownership? Or is it, you know, cutting corners in the build quality to the point that it doesn't matter? And that's what I want to talk about. So for the past couple of months, I've had these headphones on hand, been listening to them, comparing it with, well, I guess just the Caldera and some other stuff. Because frankly, I don't have a lot of closed backs in this price range, but I'm ready to let you know what I think. And before we do that, I guess a quick shout out to ZMF for sending these headphones in for review. If you want to check out the Bokeh Closed, I've got them linked in the description down below. But with that out of the way, let us dive to the table. Let's start talking about physical form factor. We'll talk about what comes inside the box, which is going to be kind of right off the bat the first thing you notice that's different between the Bokeh and the Caldera. But then we'll talk about build quality, any differences there, fit and comfort, and then we'll talk about the sound. Starting with some frequency response analysis, as well as talking about what the different pad swaps do, because that is kind of an aspect of ZMF ownership, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's just talk about what comes inside the box. And it is pretty Spartan. What you get inside the box is what you see here on the table. You get a cable, you get the headphones. I guess there's also like a little ownership certificate card, but that's pretty much it. So let's move this to the side and talk about this cable, which I believe is a stock cable. Again, like I mentioned in the Caldera review, ZMF sent me kind of a bunch of like spare parts and stuff for these headphones so I could experience all this stuff. I believe this is the stock cable, and if I'm wrong, I apologize. But the only other cable it could be is just like a purely black nylon cable versus this black and I don't know, kind of gold colored one. But they seem to be the same otherwise. But here's some things that stand out to me about this cable. Okay. Construction on it is nice. It feels nice. It feels a little bit on the heavyweight side, but it is a little bit on the stiff side. You might notice that it's not lying entirely flat. That said, I really don't mind it. I think it's kind of a good match for the headphone, which is itself a little bit on the heavyweight side. Length on this cable is it's basically designed for portable usage, and that's kind of true of the sensitivity of this headphone as well. They, in their marketing material, talk about this being drivable off of most portable sources. That was my experience as well, so I guess it makes sense that they include a cable with it that is on the shorter side, about 4 foot long. For me, this is ideal. I prefer a shorter cable because I mostly listen to my audio gear on portable sources. But if you're looking for like a long desktop cable, I'm sure ZMF will sell you one. This is just the one that comes inside the box. You do get some options in terms of what termination you want. This one comes with a 3.5 millimeter termination, which again for me is perfect because that's how I like to listen. But if you prefer a 4.4 mil balanced, even an XLR balanced, I think you have those options at checkout when you're making a purchase. And I think that's pretty cool. Otherwise, up top, you've got kind of a standard dual 3.5 millimeter entry. So you see these things plug into the headphone itself. And this is maybe another difference between the Bokeh Closed and the Caldera, whereas the Caldera used mini XLR ports. This one just uses a standard 3.5. And I'm actually kind of curious, maybe in the comments, let me know, what do you prefer? Do you prefer XLR components on your headphones, which I guess feels maybe a little bit more professional? Or do you prefer something like the 3.5, which personally I actually prefer this just because I find it to be just a lot more compatible. I'm more likely to have spare 3.5 millimeter cables. If I want to buy a replacement online, it's a lot easier to find these than it is to find the mini XLR cables that some other hi-fi or premium headphones come with. So I actually don't consider this a downgrade. I consider that an improvement. But that will lead us into talking about the headphone itself. And in terms of construction, build quality, feel, fit and finish, I don't think that they've really cut corners at all. Like this feels to me as nice as a ZMF Caldera. There's like one element of the design of this particular headphone where I think it's a little bit worse than the Caldera, but there's actually some ways in which I think this is better. In fact, starting with the wood, I think this is a more attractive wood than the stock wood that comes on the Caldera. Now, like I mentioned, ZMF stuff is like stuff you can customize it. You can order it in different woods, so you may or may not get it with this wood anyway. But as far as a stock wood material, I really like the patterning on this thing. It is, you know, it's real wood, and this patterning is pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? I want to say like editorial, but it's not editorial because it was the tree that decided how to look it. But my point is that if you buy this headphone, your headphone's not going to look like this one. And in fact, I thought it was kind of funny on their purchase page. I was checking it out. When you're making a purchase, you have to actually have to click a box that says, I acknowledge that this headphone is made out of real wood, and it's going to look different than it does in the pictures, because that is just kind of true. But that is a long way to say I think it's a very good looking headphone, and I like the fact that it is unique from headphone to headphone. I think that's a cool touch. There is, you know, the outside, I guess, carving or the sculpting of the ear cup is a little simpler than you got in the Caldera. I don't know that it's necessarily worse or feels cheaper or feels like you're missing out on anything like that, but I guess that's maybe one way that they've simplified the cost in this headphone. But really, the materials just feel quite solid. This feels like the same quality headphone that you get with their much more expensive headphones. You've got a metal yoke here. This is metal here. You've got the same kind of clicky adjuster mechanism that has the same, you know, screw hold in there. So if you want to fix it to a particular size, you can. You've got the same leather headband with, you know, kind of double layered. You've got padding here on the inside of this. Plus you've got a suspension strap underneath of it that I guess acts to distribute the weight. The fact that there's not a lot of gap between there makes me wonder how much this suspension strap is contributing to the comfort of the headphone, but it definitely contributes to the just kind of lazy boy plushness of this headphone, and that's something I like. The one thing where this headphone is a little bit worse for me than the Caldera is in terms of its tiltness, right? How far it will tilt. You might notice, I guess I'll punch on this, that as I'm tilting the ear cup out, kind of bottoms out right about there, which means that when I put this thing on my head, and I'll show you what it looks like on my head in a little bit, the ear cups just don't tilt quite as much as would be ideal for my fit. Whereas the Caldera cups seem to tilt all the way through this yoke mechanism. I don't know if it's a particular to this exact copy of this headphone, or if there is something different about the construction of it that has made for it just having a little bit less tilt, but that is just something to note because it will come into play with fit depending on your head size. If you've got a head size like mine, well, here's what it does, right? I'll throw it on my head and I'll show you. Basically what it means is that I get more pressure up here at the top of my the ear pad versus down here at the bottom. And now for me, it's not like a comfort pressure issue. For me, it's just that I don't get a full seal down here at the bottom, and that's going to play into the bass response, which again, we'll talk about as I get into talking about the sound. But yeah, just because these ear cups don't tilt out as much as they did on the Caldera, I don't get quite as good of a fit with the Bokeh Close as I did with that headphone. But otherwise, fit and comfort on this thing feels pretty much exactly the same as the Caldera, which is generally, I would say, a good thing. You've got plenty of room in these ear cups, as you can see. In fact, these are using these same pads as the Caldera. They even describe these as Caldera pads. So there's certainly no cost savings there. It's the same pad. As you can see, that the material on these things is not especially thick with this stock pad. There are a bunch of different pads that you can buy with this thing. Again, ZMF is all about the customization, buying different pads, swapping and stuff like that. But this is the stock pad here, which is like a hybrid pad. And you can see the depth is not super deep, but I still have plenty of room for my ear. Personally, yeah, generally just a comfortable place to be. The weight on these is a little bit on the heavy side, a little bit, but it is actually lighter than the Caldera. I think the Caldera they quoted as being around 530 grams, which is about what I got on my scale. I forgot to throw these things on my scale before recording, but they cite the weight on these as 480 grams. So it's about 50 grams less than the Caldera Close. Again, it's going to depend on how you customize your particular headphone, but expect around a 500 gram headphone, which is not lightweight, but it's, for me, it's light enough that I don't really care. Anything below 600 grams, usually I'm not going to feel the weight of it. And that was the case with this headphone. I don't feel this as a heavy headphone, even though it is clearly made out of some pretty heavy duty materials. Okay, Anything else to talk about the physical form factor? I don't think so. So let's start talking about the sound. And like I have been, we're gonna go to the squigs. All right. So here's the frequency response that I've measured of this headphone on my rig. Everyone's rigs are a little bit different. So if you notice differences between this squig and other squigs you've seen, well, there you go. You probably want to compare it with other headphones that I've graphed on this rig. But nonetheless, this is what we're talking about. If you want to take a look at this, I do have it on Squig Link, linked in the description down below. You can compare it with all those other things. But let's do some analysis together here on this headphone. And a couple of features. There's basically three main features of this frequency response that stand out to me here in the graph that I think do play out very much in the listening impression, okay? Feature number one is there is gobs of bass here on the Bokeh closed. And you can see that is quite a bit of the bass extends quite well into the sub bass. It is quite meaty here in the mid bass. There is this little dip feature here. I don't know that I necessarily hear that, but you can see that the lower mids are also quite full. Frankly, like this bass boost just about starts at 1,000 hertz, which is pretty early for a bass boost, if I'm particularly honest, but that definitely plays into the perceived sound of this headphone. The next feature that will stand out to you probably in the graph, and I think does stand out in listening impressions, is the upper mid-range. This is kind of where vocals, this is my mental model, is that this is where vocals sit. And this being kind of below this dotted line just means that the vocals are going to be very much on the relaxed side. I think you could very safely describe this as a recessed vocals tuning. And then kind of coinciding with that is you have a fairly dark treble presentation. You know, I think this peak feature here is somewhat heard, but mostly you're going to hear like just a dark treble presentation, right? So you have kind of this combination of a lot of bass starting very early in the frequency response, or very early in its rise, with a recessed mid-range and kind of dark treble. It gives you a sense of what this headphone probably sounds like. And I guess that will get into my particular subjective listening impressions of this headphone, which is, if you're a mid-range lover, and you probably know I am a mid-range lover, this is not the headphone for you, okay? This is a lot of bass on this headphone, and not particularly great bass, if I'm particularly honest, like for my tastes, but also, you know, part of it might just be the way that this headphone is fitting me. I showed you in the graph that it does extend pretty well into the sub bass frequencies, but on my head, it doesn't feel like I'm getting a whole lot of sub bass. Like the bass feels a little bit on the dry side, kind of thudding, boomy, thick, bloated, like kind of all the not complimentary words you could use to describe bass is frankly how I would describe the bass on the Bokeh closed. I don't love it. The mid-range is, again, it's on the recess side. It comes across fairly wonky to my ear. If you're listening to vocal content, this is definitely not going to be the tuning for you. And that bass with the recessed mid-range and the pretty dark treble just overall give this kind of what I describe as like nightclub tuning. It's just like kind of this big thumping, almost like a headache inducing type tuning that again is pretty far from my particular preferences. It's not particularly incisive. Like if you're looking for that really sharp delineation between sounds and instruments and spacing and imaging, and that's all kind of the stuff that I usually look for in a sound tuning, that is not what the Bokeh does. Instead, it gives you kind of just this laid back, warm, but even calling it laid back is maybe a bit of a misnomer because it's so overbearing in the bass. And this is maybe a problem I had too, is that I made a mental note as I was listening to this, is I found myself listening to this headphone louder than I typically do. And I think I probably just subconsciously was bumping up the volume to get more of that vocal presence that I usually like. But nonetheless, I kind of found myself listening to this a little bit louder than usual. And because of that, kind of contributed to this overall kind of cacophonous, almost tiring sound that is what I experience here with the Bokeh closed. So there is that. It is just not a particularly incisive headphone. And if that's what you're looking for, well, some of the pad swaps might give you a little bit of that. So let me talk about the pad swaps. And if you want to look at this stuff for yourself, again, like I mentioned, I do have this on Squig Link. Pardon the mess. Let me move that stuff out of the way real quick. In fact, let me punch out and show you this. So if you go over to Squig Link and you want to do these comparisons yourself, take a look at this little plus button. You can see that the stock measurement is using the hybrid pads with the burst mesh. I've got measurements with the different meshes if you want to take a look at what those do to the sound. They don't change it that much, and I guess I'll show you that in a little bit. but also with the pad swaps, right? So if you throw on the protein pads, for example, right, you can take a look at what that does to the frequency response. You give it a little bit more mid-bass punch, maybe even a little bit more treble excitement, and that's just kind of how you can use Squiglink to do this analysis on your own. But let me talk about it, my personal listening impressions. So like I mentioned, this is the protein pad. Basically, it's a protein leather or a fake leather, depending on which verbiage you like to use. Vegan leather, maybe. But this pad in particular, I would say makes the headphone a little bit, like you saw on the graph, it makes it a little bit punchier in the bass. I actually get better sub-bass extension on this. I don't know if it's sealing better on my head, or maybe it's just because there is more bass, or also because there is maybe a little bit more treble energy. It's just making it feel a little bit more incisive across the range. Now, you would think that that would be a plus for me, because I described this stock sound as being a little bit on the unincisive side, but I guess in this case, I didn't really necessarily find it to be an improvement. It just makes it a little bit more aggressive, I guess, in its sound presentation, a little bit more dominating in the bass, making it a little bit more punchy. And because of that, frankly, I found this particular pad to make it just a little bit more on the tiring side already. Whereas if you want to make it a little bit softer, a little bit more comfortable, I guess, less tiring, this would be the pad I would go with. This is the suede, kind of a micro suede pad. And generally, this is my preferred material for a pad, just physical form factor, aesthetic wise. I really like this material. As far as what it does for the sound on the Bokeh Close is it's going to soften the edges of everything. I think it does reduce the bass a little bit. And for me, it made everything even a little bit extra blurrier in terms of the incisiveness of transients and stuff like that. So for me, while it does make it maybe a little bit more comfortable and relaxed to listen to versus the stock tuning, I don't know that these necessarily improved it for me. So for my taste, I would actually say that the stock pad is my preferred pad. But if you want to change up the sound tuning, this is kind of like your spectrum with this, right? Whereas the protein leather pad is going to give you just a little bit more incisive sound, punchier bass, tighter bass, kind of more of a V-shaped sound signature. Whereas the suede is going to give you that softer, more relaxed sound signature, and the stock pad is going to come kind of somewhere in the middle. But that is, I don't know, I would say that the in the middle ends up being where I would say I personally prefer it. Although you might have gotten the impression that even with the stock tuning, not necessarily my preferred sound. Some alternatives to consider. I don't have any other closed back headphones in this price range on hand to compare, but I have heard some other headphones. So just to kind of like throw out a couple of other things that you could consider. There was like the Focal, oh my gosh, the Focal, they've got two of them. They've got the Radiance as well. What's the other one called? I'm already blanking on that one now too. But they've got two different closed back headphones, both priced around $1,000. Those ones also have some funkiness in the mid-range, but I think they're going to be tuned closer to normal versus this. I would say that the Radiance is maybe a little bit aggressive, a little bit shimmery in the treble in a way where this is not. This is pretty relaxed in the treble. So if you're looking for that incisive edge, something like the Radiance can give that in a way that this doesn't. But again, it's a very different total balance. And if the words I'm using are not helpful in terms of understanding it, hopefully you can get your ears on these things because they sound quite different. And if you have a preference for one or the other, it's probably going to be a strong preference. Personally, I would lean toward the Radiance. You could also go with, and this is a headphone I haven't reviewed, but I have listened to it a little bit. There is the Audeze LCD2 Closed. Aesthetically, I don't really like the way that headphone looks. It looks like something that they made out of like a Create a character. I don't know. They just like picked random carbon fiber material and then slapped a logo on top of it. But in terms of sound signature, I do prefer the way that the LCD2 Closed sounds. It's got that incisive edge to it. It's got that texturing in the mid-range and stuff that I like. And it also still has a pretty decent bass punch to it. It's just going to be more of a clean bass punch. Whereas what you get here on the Bokeh Closed is just kind of like this thick, kind of soupy, again, kind of a nightclub bass. But that might be what you're looking for. And I guess that will lead us into my conclusion here on this headphone. I'm a little bit split on this one. You know, I really do appreciate the build and stuff that goes into the ZMF headphones. I like this pride of ownership aspect of it. Like, this is a headphone that I could see like you buying and handing down to your kids, and like they hand it down to their kids. And like, this is like, it's got heirloom, like this is worth passing down between generations because of what goes into the build on this. But on the other hand, I really do not like the way this headphone sounds. But I know that there's definitely people that do like the way this headphone sounds. So I don't know. I would highly recommend, if you're thinking about this headphone, get your ears on it, see for yourself. If you know that your tastes are like mine, just know that this is probably not going to be the headphone for you. Out of 5 stars, unfortunately, I'm going to have to give this one just 2 stars. But if you think that your tastes are not like mine and you want to take a look at the Bokeh clothes, I've got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and join me on Discord. I've got Discord linked down below as well, where I spend probably way too much time. But that's a good place to connect with the community, maybe get some opinions from other people that are not just me. But yeah, that'll do it. Otherwise, I will catch you on the next super review. Cheers.
Join with the force of reviews, we now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's begin with the